You all, and thank you for being here tonight. Once upon a time, when the days were getting shorter and nights were closing in, people would gather to hear stories of life. So today, at the beginning of winter and the start of a new year, people have come together from far and wide, from Ireland and Hebden Bridge and Cardiff and Norfolk, and Brighton and Devon and Russia, arriving here in this virtual messenger room to hear a way-seeking mind story. It is a mystery, this virtual world, and it is a part of a new reality for me, perfectly timed to arrive with the pandemic lockdowns. And I have been just amazed and very grateful by the intimacy of our Sangha relationships, that somehow the embodied learning of knowing you all, sitting on retreats with you, has been evoked in this virtual world. And I am so grateful for this opportunity to share this talk with you, for you are all part of its creation. Just as my children brought forth me as a mother, so for the last 3 weeks this way-seeking mind story has evolved. It has been part of my life with you on this retreat, on this practice period, and has been an opportunity for me to reflect on my journey, the journey that has led me to being here with you. And I want to say something about the words that I used to create this story, because words never really touch an experience, but they're my best attempt. So I see Zazen as the centre of my practice, the place where I return, where I feel both separate and connected to everything. So I will begin with a poem and then introduce the talk by creating a context for this way-seeking mind talk. First exploring time and then exploring the meaning for me of the way-seeking mind. Sitting Zazen. Sitting Zazen, I arrive alone. A place of silence, a place to return to, a refuge, a home. Sitting Zazen, wall facing, the posture arrives, the body upright and relaxed, hands in cosmic mudra, the mind settles, the breath slows, returning. Sitting Zazen, opening to a pool of stillness, a still place which grows and grows, never ending, containing all the struggles and turbulence of this life, giving them all space, a space of compassion, a place of openness and connection, a place to process, returning. Sitting Zazen, the body tires, limbs ache, the mind wanders, restless, impulsive, and returns, again and again, returning. Sitting Zazen, inner and outer dissolve, self and other are one, past and future are both here and now, in silence and stillness, at peace. So where did this all begin? I want to say there is no beginning, no end, just a growing and evolving that has resulted in me being here with you. And it's interesting because I want to talk about time now. And I wrote this before we did the readings this week of there's 2 study books. And so it left me thinking last night after I talked about time. It made me think, where did I develop these ideas about time? And I think it went right back to when I first left home, which was, I guess, the early 70s. And at that time, Ram Dass and being here now was really important. And so for me, in those really early days of flower power and experimenting, the feeling of just being here now felt quite revolutionary, and I think it's gone on developing throughout my life. And as a systemic therapist, time was always really important because it was seen as circular, and there was a book written by Boscolo called Times of Time, which for me kind of matched a lot of what Dogen would say about time. So I guess I wanted to say that as a context for what I'm now going to say, because at this very moment in time, at this present moment, past time and future time are both here in this very moment. For it is in this present that I connect to the past memories and future dreams. So my experience of the present moment might be described as being in a large pool. And I find the idea of being in a large pool is a really useful metaphor for time, because it contains all my life experience. And I see the surface of the pond as the present, and the past going down and down to the depths. It is a complex pool full of life, and the currents and the turbulence in this pool are dynamic and forever changing, sometimes overwhelming and sometimes calm, sometimes interweaving and sometimes separate, sometimes clear and sometimes very muddy. And in this talk I want to explore and reflect on some of these currents and eddies that have influenced and shaped my life. First though, I want to explore the meaning of the way-seeking mind. So how can we understand the way-seeking mind? Part of my training as a systemic therapist was exploring language and words. So for me, words can be seen as alive and poetic and containing a world of meaning within them. So as I look into my understanding and experience of the way-seeking mind, what is it that I see? What has resulted in me being here with you? And what I see is times that I found motivating and inspiring. Wittgenstein talks about the meaning of the word as in its action. So looking into the action, what is happening when I feel inspired and motivated? So an easy example is my first experience of a retreat with Reb. And as I sit listening to his Dharma talk, there appears to be a complex process at play. As I reflect on this process, and I'm reflecting on it now rather than at the time, I realise that these moments are neither inside of me, part of me, or outside of me, part of Reb or the retreat, but seem to be a dynamic connecting, inner and outer, a motivational energy which inspires and guides the meaning of my life, an energy that harmonises and needs to change. So what were the causes and conditions that informed the arising of my way-seeking mind? And I write I say my, but it does not feel like my, for it belongs to a place of no separation, a feeling of not being separate from time, being a time being in time, inside of time, living in time, living in relationship and being one with the world. Now all this is just one part of my life today, part of a fluid story, part of a fluid way-seeking mind story, which is in flow, always evolving and changing as time goes by, and living alongside numerous other stories of my life. So this week, last week and the week before, in reflecting on being here, on being present, of developing these ideas about a way-seeking mind in Zazen, out of Zazen, in my sleeping, in my waking, in my life, in this large pool of life, I see that I'm surrounded by, first of all, in this pool, a dynamic circle which is forever moving and changing. And as I look at it, I think it's, for me, a circle of learning, a circle of change. And this circle of learning can be traced back to my childhood, to my father saying that life was learning, learning was life. And as a child, this seemed an interesting thought, that everything and anything could be seen as an opportunity for learning. And it brought with it an element of playful curiosity, And I guess as a child, I was always a bit mischievous and I was always getting into trouble and always wanting to kind of play around with ideas. And the idea of playful curiosity would arise often. Maybe I can give an example. I can think of lots of very difficult examples. So here's an easy one. That at school it was autumn and there were lots and lots of daddy longlegses all around the school because it was quite a light school. And my friend and I collected them all in these bags and put them inside the teacher's desk. And when he opened the desk, they all flew out. And for me, it was just fun, but hey, it gets you into trouble as well. So this approach to experience of curiosity has continued throughout my life. A spirit of curiosity about how to understand and connect to other people. How each experience is a precious opportunity. For, as Dogen said, to study the Buddha-Way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. And that for me was a learning. Maybe it was the first retreat I went on with Reb, where he was talking about the Genjo Koan. And up until that point, I saw my life as being given meaning by language through social construction, that the language I used created my world. And this idea of being actualized by myriad beings, that somehow if we're still, the world comes and meets us, I thought was inspiring. So I trained as a systemic therapist, and one of the core papers about life or the position of the therapist was called Circularity, Curiosity and Neutrality. And there's always been an interweaving between the world of therapy and systemic ideas and Buddhism, and I guess this is a good example. So circularity was looking at the circularity in life rather than a linear idea. It was looking at all the interconnectedness and all the feedback loops. That rather than an identity, we develop who we are in relationship to others, and people use this idea of we-dentity rather than identity to try and show that reality, that we are developed in relationship. Curiosity, that through being curious and observing and noticing what is happening, we engage in a dynamic of change. And within the therapeutic world, just engaging or just helping other people become curious and observe their life, it was always fascinating how that would lead or could lead to change. And neutrality, because every experience has a complex web of understanding and meaning. And as a therapist, it was really important to be neutral. And that once we decide or are certain about an idea, meaning or about life or about any issue, it closes down a conversation. So in losing our neutrality, we return from being interested and connected to the other. So in losing neutrality, we return from being interested and connected to other people's reality and other people's ideas back to our own reality. One other thought about life as learning is that some of the ideas I had made sense of or understood had arisen through my lived experience. And maybe other people have had that too, that suddenly you're reading something or hearing something and it resonates, that you already have made sense of that idea. And maybe observing and neutrality would be one of those ideas that somehow in observing change happens. And so that would happen in life. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's happening. Okay, back to... Okay. So this process of connection between what I already understood and the teachings in Zen or in systemic ideas, my understanding of that was that it had created a fit between a kind of my knowing of ideas and the ideas that were being spoken about. And this feeling of coherence felt liberating and freeing, and it felt as if it was validating, and it motivated me to want to learn more. So how do I make sense of this? Maybe it illustrates the process of the way-seeking mind, that the way-seeking mind operates like a guide, something that is not part of consciousness, but rather a sense of knowing when something feels right, and knowing from within, recognising a good fit. And I guess the opposite of that would be times in my life when I felt out of kilter, that something was missing, and I was searching for something to, satisfy me or complete me. So this idea of creating a fit with something connects for me with a quote that Pema Chowdhury has in her book, where she talks about the story about shoes. So if you want to protect your feet, wear shoes. And if you want to protect yourself from the words provocations tame your mind, the antidote to misery is to stay present. And for me that was a really powerful lesson that fitted with what I'm trying to say, that all we can do is observe ourselves, study ourselves, change ourselves, rather than expect other people to be the ones to change or the ones that have got it wrong. So one of the results of seeing life as currents in a pool is that I do not follow any chronological order. Just as a pebble creates ripples and waves in a pond, so today's events resonate, bump up against and weave with other experiences and stories. A recognition that this dynamic process will influence the meaning of my experience today, and also can influence and change my stories and experiences of the past. For no one can predict the future of the past. So now, having created a context for this way-seeking mind story, I will now explore 4 strong currents that seem to be present in my life. One is the spiritual path, the second is family, third is illness, and the fourth is nature. And although I describe these 4 currents, actually they all connect and they all interweave. So first, the spiritual path. Sitting Zazen is, as I said earlier, at the centre of my way-seeking mind, a place, a strong current of motivation and inspiration. It is the place of returning from the busyness of life and just being, just sitting, just seeing what arises. And maybe the poem I read at the beginning provides a flavour of Zazen for me. Zazen has been a great teacher. Thinking back to my first retreat with Reb, it was the summer of 2006, the year my mother died, and I had booked onto the retreat at Gaia House because it was a silent retreat, and I wanted silence, a place to be still, to just sit and be with whatever arose, a place to process. It was my first Zen retreat, and I sat facing the wall, opening to the stillness and silence. And then when Reb started to talk, I felt open, I felt he touched me, and I felt his wisdom, his presence, his skillful engagement with others, meeting them where they were. And there was a turning in his conversation with others, and a turning for me. It felt as if any question or issue that people brought was met and then turned. Change happened, and this was something I had not seen or experienced before. I turned. I knew I had found my teacher. So I returned to sit with Reb twice a year, once at Gaia House and once at Fell Centre. And When I sat with Reb, this feeling of openness, feeling of peace and harmony would arrive. And I can remember being fascinated by that process, and on one occasion in Dokusan asking Reb about it. What were the causes and conditions? How was it made? How did it arise? And he just smiled. No answer came. Yet for me this process was inspiring, was motivating, and what made and encouraged me to go on with my practice. So before Zen, there were 6 years I had practicing with the FWBO. And I guess in those 6 years, it was the place where I'd made a commitment to practice. And the FWBO is now the Tratna community. And before that, I practiced TM. And that was from 1975, Transcendental Meditation. And maybe it's worth reflecting a little on how I came to learn TM. I was 24. It was 1975, it was the summer holidays. I was halfway through a youth and community work training, and I thought that TM would help me to settle and manage the challenges of life, the places where I felt anxious, overwhelmed or insecure. So I received a mantra and I practiced TM 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening. And even back then I thought there was an element of returning to a still place, and that this still place was precious. And before all of this, there is my childhood. My father was a C of E vicar. My mother's father was a C of A vicar. So my childhood experience was shaped by being a vicar's daughter and a grand vicar's daughter and the second child of 4 children. On thinking about motivation in childhood, I do not think I had reflective motivation, and instead think I had embodied learning through action and habit. For me, the religious life of the convent school and going to my father's church, the religious rituals and the atmosphere of the churches and the nuns has undoubtedly had a lasting influence on my life. Today, looking back at those rituals, at the services, it feels like one of performance. I was never sure what I believed or what it meant. As a child, we moved to 4 very different parishes during my childhood, and I always felt I was trying to adapt and fit into the different language games and cultures and norms. As a vicar's daughter, I felt as if I was positioned by others as having certain beliefs and values, something I did not understand or connect to, and left me feeling confused and embarrassed. The impact of being judged or positioned as a vicar's daughter led me to try and hide my identity from others. I wanted to be liked, I wanted to be accepted for who I was, and I didn't want to be judged or positioned as a vicar's daughter. I felt on the margins of life and felt most comfortable on the outside and as an observer. So sometimes I felt shy, and at other times had a lot of fun creating imaginary identities at parties and dances. So now I'm going back into the current, into the pool, and looking at the current of family. And this is one that pervades my entire life. It is such a strong current of learning and so intricately connected to practice. From birth to now being retired, family relationships have always been there, a co-creative flow of creativity. It has not always been an easy place to be, sometimes stormy, sometimes sad, and within my birth family my siblings have all gone on to live very different lives, yet we also share such a strong connection, and in times of crisis we are there for each other. Maybe this intimacy arises through a shared history, a shared knowing of each other over time, or maybe it's just being part of a shared gene pool. Chris and I met when we were undertaking a youth and community work training. We married and have 3 children, Peter, and twin girls, Rachel and Lindsay, who have both been ordained into the Triratna community and are now called Amaladi and Singamati. And they have been my greatest teacher. So what have been the biggest lessons I've learnt from them? Learning to be a mother was never easy for me. Alongside the enormous feelings of love came responsibility, and that responsibility was 24/7. I can remember thinking that nobody had told me about this. And although I wanted to be a good mother, to understand them, to be there for them, to help them cope with the struggles of life, to protect them from suffering, I also missed my career and found being at home all the time difficult. So I returned to work, and Chris and I tried to balance family life with our careers, and sometimes that was tough. And it was also tough when my good intentions to be a good mother were not met with their reality. For them, their life was sometimes painful and upsetting, and they sometimes suffered. So over the years, I have learnt to listen to their stories and let go of my ideas and apologise to them for their suffering and for the suffering I have caused. At one of the Hebden Bridge sits just recently, Shundo shared a story from Reb that when he bowed, I think it was at Dasahara, he said, "Thank you, I am sorry, I love you." And that for me was just spot on in my relationships to everyone, but also so spot on in relationship to my family and to my children. Thank you for being here, for sharing your life with me. A precious jewel. I'm so sorry for all the pain I have caused you, and I love you. And alongside this, there are so many joys and celebrations of life, as well as the big ceremonies, sharing weddings and grandchildren. Our journeys are so interconnected. Their spiritual journeys influence us as we influence them. So back to the pool of time, to my experience of old age, sickness, illness and death. I will just focus on illness here, not time for the rest. So it's been a tough year for me this year and for my family. At the start of the year, my brother-in-law died 8 weeks after being diagnosed with cancer. And also one of my daughters was diagnosed with breast cancer and needed a mastectomy. She's now doing well. And then we went into lockdown and are now in the middle of a pandemic. My husband Chris had a heart transplant 33 years ago, and so we were shielding during the first lockdown. My other daughter has a degenerative neurological condition which has resulted in her body becoming weaker. For the last 5 or 6 years, she has used a wheelchair and an adapted car to get around. But more recently, April or May this year, she has lost strength in her upper body, so is now unable to drive and needs some support at home. For me, learning about illness began as a child when I joined the St John's Ambulance Brigade. My mother had trained as a nurse and always encouraged me to follow in her footsteps. I was very happy to leave home at 17 and started an ophthalmic nursing diploma and then went on to general nurse training. It was a steep learning curve, caring for the sick and dying, and whilst I enjoyed the physical aspect of caring for people and getting to know them, I did become disillusioned with nursing and never completed my training. I found it so difficult to just nurse, just obey, just be quiet, and have my relationship prescribed by others. We weren't allowed to chat or be open to patients when they asked questions about their health or treatment. My next brush with illness was 33 years ago when Chris became acutely ill and was admitted to the Brompton Hospital needing a heart transplant. Family life was turned upside down, the taken for granted overthrown. I was terrified that Chris would die and the children would lose their father and I would be left on my own to raise 3 children. The rug had been pulled out from under my feet and my assumptions about security shattered. After 2 months, a match was found. Chris had a heart transplant and 10 days later was home. Home, but such a different home. Such a fragile home. Such a tender home. Such a grateful home. with rigorous cleaning routines and numerous hospital appointments. So, illness was for us a wake-up call as we reflected on what we might have contributed to Chris's heart failure and what changes we could make to our lives in order to live a healthier and less stressful life. We explored the research, read books, looked for solutions, one of which was the possibility of living in community. Illness faced us with vulnerability and impermanence. So we made changes. We like martial arts, karate, tai chi, qigong, and changed our diet, became vegetarian, and then macrobiotic, and became healthier and fitter. And we also started attending the Amaravati meditation groups each week. Amaravati is a monastery that was very close to us when we lived in Slip End. So there were two strong currents in the pool. Vulnerability resulting from... You muted me.
Sorry, can I suggest that Jenny... I'm finding quite hard to hear.
There's a feedback loop.
It's coming through Danny's speaker.
What do you want me to do?
So on your screen, there's a microphone. Turn your microphone off.
Yeah, thank you. So there were two...
Hold on a moment, Claire. I need to restart. Okay.
So there were two strong currents in the pool, vulnerability resulting from insecurity and a recognition of impermanence, and gratitude. Gratitude for each day of life and an appreciation of all the people who had made Chris's life possible. And this year my sadness as a mother seeing my daughter's struggles alongside their courage has at times been overwhelming. And Zazen has been invaluable, a place to be still, a place to cry, a place to feel gratitude. Gratitude for their beauty, the preciousness of their lives, and for all the health professionals who have taken care of them, and also gratitude for my health and life. It is an interesting reflection on how gratitude arises out of suffering. I wonder whether the upturning of the taken for granted results in seeing the taken for granted differently. So out of sickness we start to value and take care of our health. Also I believe that we were in some way responsible for our health, and if we were to make the right changes everything would be okay. And maybe this is important alongside a recognition that illness changed our thinking about our life, our priorities, what was important to us, and the meaning of how we wanted to go on. So lastly, I'm going to explore nature. And this is another strong current in my life, and I think it's always been there. As a child, we always had large gardens, and I would love just playing in the garden and climbing trees. And today, I love the world of the allotment in our garden and the connection with the outside world to nature. The current has always been there, and in retirement and lockdown, this has just become stronger. I've had the belief for a long time that if we take care of the soil will take care of us. It is a relationship of reciprocity between the earth and the plants, and it goes on. So in taking care of the plants give us fruit and vegetables in abundance, and as I care for the allotment, I feel cared for. Part of the joy of the allotment community is that relationship of reciprocity, a sharing of seedlings, plants and produce with each other, and with the food bank, alongside horticultural tips and wisdom. It is one of my happy places. a place with no expectations, a place of responding to the needs of the plants and the earth. It is a place where my mind calms as I listen to the sounds of birdsong and the wind in the trees, the smell of the soil from digging and the sight of the changing seasons. So to conclude, COVID-19 and the lockdown has enabled me to have a change of lifestyle. As the lockdown changed what it was possible for me to do, how I spent my time changed, my priorities changed, life became simpler, the outside world became quieter, cleaner air, more birdsong, less traffic noise, no aeroplanes, and there was more time to walk and spend time on the allotment. Life was not as busy. There was also more time for reflection, and one of the changes that I made at the beginning of lockdown was to start the day with writing morning pages. This is an idea from Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way for Retirement. Julia thinks of the morning pages as a form of active meditation. She says it's a whisk which dislodges dust from every corner of life. So after getting out of bed, I just write 3 pages of writing, just 3 stream of consciousness pages, musing on life and what is happening. And what I have noticed is that this putting down of ideas has been a place to reflect on what is happening. It does not feel like thinking, but rather allowing the pen to write. And when there is nothing to write, just let the pen go on writing and keep on writing for 3 pages. And so agreeing to share this way-seeking mind talk at the start of the practice period has created a clear focus for me, a focus to be present, to observe, and to explore what is happening, how ideas are interweaving, to reflect on the past of what happened to lead to this. And Chris has been an amazing support, cleaning the temple, cooking the food, and encouraging and supporting me each day. So in the last 3 weeks, some of what I have spoken about in this way-seeking mind talk arose in my morning pages, and some arose in Zazen, and some in the study sessions and Dharma talks, or chatting with Chris, and some when I was walking or on the allotment. And as the weeks have gone by, so this talk has taken shape. So finally, a great big thank you to you all. Thank you for the invitation to share this talk. Thank you all for your practice, for being here. Just a big thank you.
Thank you, Clare.